I really want to just rise and thank, first of all, I want to thank my members in the Republican Conference for allowing me to lead you again this session, for representing your districts and the people of New York, and representing the values of our conference and the values of your districts and your constituents every day on this floor and every day in this building. And that makes my job easier, and it makes my job, makes me very much more proud to lead this conference here in Albany. So I want to thank all of you. I certainly want to single out a couple people, certainly Senator Lanza, who gave a great speech. He had about 3 minutes to prepare. He sat down, and I said, "You're going to talk on this resolution." And he was like all kind of flustered. He goes, "That's not really my thing, you know?" And I said, "Yes, it is your thing. Like, what are you talking about? You talk. Like, that's what you do, right?" So, and he was all flustered. And then he got even more flustered because Senator Breslin just stood up when he was supposed to talk. And then he was like looking at me, and I go, "You're going to talk after. Don't worry about it. You know, don't worry about it." So, and it all worked out. But I want to thank him. You know, being the floor leader is tough on both sides for a litany of reasons. You have to deal with the leaders. You have to deal with the members. You're stuck on the floor for hours at the end of session during the budget. Certainly this last week, the last 2 weeks, a lot of bills. And I know it's not easy, but I want to thank Senator Lanza for his leadership in our conference these last several weeks and for this entire session. So thank you, Senator Lanza. To Senator O'Mara, I know the budget, you know, it was a month late this year, right, roughly. So it was only a little bit ago, and I want to thank you. I think you've become quite the dance partner with Senator Krueger, and so I appreciate all that goes on there. You know, it's a $239 billion budget, and yet both of you managed. No one could know everything about that. Yet they almost managed to make me think that you both do know everything about that budget, which is really, I think, a credit to both Senator O'Mara and Senator Krueger. I do want to thank my partner, my colleague across the way, Majority Leader Stewart Cousins, for her partnership, for her grace, and for her leadership of her conference and this chamber. So Senator Stewart Cousins, thank you. I wish you a nice summer. I hope to not see you soon, at least here. If I see you out in real life, that's fine. But I hope to not see you here, in spite of Senator Gianaris' ominous comment. Speaking of ominous, Senator Gianaris, thank you for what you do and for putting up with Senator Lanza, if nothing else. But I know it's tough on both sides, so I appreciate the leadership and the work on both sides. To all the staff, but certainly to our staff, to my staff. I think it was Senator Mannion who talked about the staff as the unsung heroes. That's certainly true for all of us. It is absolutely true when you're a conference leader. My parents were down here a couple weeks ago, maybe a month and a half ago. They were down here, and my mom, you know, she goes, "There's so many people that work in the Capitol." And I said, "Yeah, that's just the Senate Majority staff, you know what I mean?" So, but it was a lot, she was blown away at the number of people that make this place go. And I never think of it because we're here all the time, and you forget, and I don't know if we forget, but sometimes you take for granted all the people whose names are not going to be on a door or whose names will never be on a political sign or a ballot, or hopefully for theirs, you know, they never want to be in the newspaper, but they are working their butts off for our constituents and for the people in New York. And they may never meet these folks. And yet they do it, and they do it for all of us. They do it because they believe in the cause. They believe in what we are trying to do here for the state. And so to all the staff, but certainly our staff, for putting up with me, for putting up with all of our members, for working to get bills across the finish line, working on memos and analysis and briefing bills at midnight or later, or very early after briefing bills at midnight. I just want to thank the entire staff for everything you do. I'm not going to belabor policy or all the political differences. It's late. It's 8 o'clock on a Friday. My members have heard it for 6 months, and my colleagues across the aisle obviously don't want to hear it either, I'm sure. But I'll just say a couple things. We do have different ideas of where the state is and needs to go. There were some words that were mentioned throughout session. Affordability. Affordability was, I think, mentioned numerous times by people across both sides of the aisle. But I would tell you that we have very different ideas of what and how we achieve affordability for the people of the state. Because we did pass things here, even today, that are not going to make people's lives more affordable. They're going to make people's lives more expensive. They're going to make New Yorkers, New York workers, working families, we're making their lives more expensive. However noble the incentive or the origin of these bills, and I say that with all due respect to my colleagues across the aisle, who I believe sincerely advanced these bills to try to make the environment better, to try to make public health better. And yet, while some of the hopes and aspirations of those bills are dubious or maybe ambiguous or are hopeful, the reality is we're making New Yorkers' grocery bills, we're making New Yorkers' energy costs, we're making the cost to live here more expensive. And the result is people who are stuck here are seeing more of their money go elsewhere, and people who are not are leaving. That's the reality. And we can't pretend that's not a reality. Whatever our political ideas are, I think one of the things we do in this chamber and in the other chamber and in Washington, D.C., or at least what you're supposed to do in all of those chambers, is you're supposed to balance your philosophy and your political ideals with practical realities. That's where real politics and governance actually happens, because there are no ideal worlds. And sometimes your political ideals and hopes have to balance against practical realities, and the practical reality is New York State is one of the higher costs, if not highest cost, least affordable state in the union today, and there's reasons for that. And some of those reasons are things we do here, and things that we did here today, this week, this session. We know about the concern about crime, retail theft, retail workers. We had a bill dealing with retail workers' safety. And again, I have no doubt that the majority of my colleagues across the aisle absolutely care about retail workers and the safety of those workers. But we have very different ideas of how to achieve safety for those workers and what maybe the root cause is as to why those workers may not feel safe or may not be safe in New York. We recognize there's a safety issue because there was a bill called the Retail Worker Safety Bill. And yet, we disagree on what we're really trying to do and the best way to effectuate that. I don't know that we did much to actually make retail establishments, workers safer. I don't think we did a lot to make the people who shop in those establishments safer. And I certainly don't think we did anything to encourage those establishments, the brick and mortar establishments, to stay here in New York and to employ people here in New York and offer goods and services to people here in New York. A lot's been made about the migrant crisis, a lot obviously during the budget. And I want to highlight it only in the sense that it mirrors to me what happened this week with the congestion pricing. Maybe fiasco is too strong of a word, but something happened. And I think we probably actually all could agree that something happened and maybe it was a fiasco as to how it played out. But the reality is, so we have sanctuary policies in New York, which some people will defend and say those are good things. But that led to and is directly responsible for 185,000 migrants coming to New York City, and as a result, putting a real strain on the budget and the fiscal resources of the city of New York. No small thing, because whether you live in the city or not, it's almost half the population of our great state. So whether you're in Niagara County, the North Country, Long Island, or in Staten Island, what happens in New York and New York's fiscal sustainability and viability matter. It has to matter. And so when the city of New York and the mayor of New York say this could devastate us, this could, really wreck the city's budget, we all have to take notice. And as a result, we put $2.4 billion towards a crisis, but a crisis that stemmed from governmental policies. I would argue failed ones, but governmental policies, both state level and at the city level. We didn't do anything to address that root cause. The reason I bring that up really is to talk about the congestion pricing, because Republicans in our conference, in this minority conference, talked and warned of the dangers and the costs and the impact on working people with congestion pricing, that it was a tax, that it would be a problem, that it would absolutely hurt the affordability argument, that only people who were very rich would be able to pay that congestion price, or we would have, you could take the subway and maybe deal with the risks associated with taking the New York subway. And so we talked about this, and I talked about it, and senators from Long Island talked about it, and Senator Lanza talked about it, and senators from the Hudson Valley talked about it. And all of those items remain true today. And yet we passed the bill, it was set to go into law, and yet here we are on the eve, obviously, 6 months or so away from a seminal event here in New York and the country, which of course is election year, and suddenly the congestion pricing was paused. Somebody, I think the governor, hit the panic button. And now there's no congestion pricing. But you know what there is? There's a, $500 billion hole in the MTA budget created by the flawed policy of congestion pricing, and then also, I guess you could argue, created by a lack of leadership and a failure of governance. I'll say that, and I'll end with this, Mr. President, which is that New Yorkers see these policies for what they are, driving costs up, taking more money from them. Very rarely do they see the benefits. Very rarely, if ever. But they're looking for competent leadership. They're looking for practical leadership, common sense leadership that puts working families. When we say affordability, I think sometimes people think that's a buzzword. I can tell you for most people, and I'd be willing to bet most people that we represent, that's a very real thing. $500 more a year on your grocery bill is a real thing. Some of us are fortunate in this room, that's not a real thing. It's an annoyance. It's a statistic. But for many of our constituents, that's a real thing. That's a real problem. That's something else they will not be able to get for their families if they can do the $500 at all. I think of the person who talks about the stock market as proof that the economy is doing well. Many of my constituents, that's not the way it works, and it's not the way it works for a lot of New Yorkers. That is not the metric for them. I realize there's people in this room who represent wealthier areas, and so they can talk about innovation, and they can talk about investment in the future, and that's good, and it is good. But for a lot of New Yorkers who are struggling and who are hanging on and don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, they don't want to hear about innovation or 12 years from now. They want someone to lead and tell them how they're going to get to tomorrow. That's the obligation of the people in this room. That's the obligation I know we all take very seriously, but we have very different ideas, and I do think it is important that New Yorkers of all stripes, because most New Yorkers are not as married, maybe, to their political party or affiliation as we all are, by extension of us being here. Most New Yorkers are looking for a viable, they want to hear alternatives. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you deserve to hear alternatives to, there's more than one way to get to where we're trying to go. And I believe New Yorkers need alternatives on a number of issues. And I was very proud that our conference outlined many of those alternatives during this last 6 months. And so again, to my members, I want to say thank you. To my colleagues across the aisle, I want to say thank you, because I do appreciate the debates. Yes, I do watch them, and as much for our members as I do the other members. But I do watch them, and I'm always impressed by the substance of these debates. And it's a reminder, and it should be a reminder to people who watch at home, that the elected people you send here, however you may feel about them, do take their job seriously, do take the awesome responsibility. I mean, you're elected by hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom you'll never meet. What an awesome responsibility. No wonder Senator Breslin feels so in awe, or Senator Mannion, Senator Thomas feel so moved as they leave here, because what a unique thing that we get sent here by people who we may never talk to, never know, but they're sending us here to make their life better. And they think we can do it. Pretty awesome. So I wish everyone a great summer, Mr. President. I hope to see everyone once more before the end of the year, and maybe some new faces next year. That's just me. But I hope everybody has a great summer, has a great fall, and I wish everyone good luck come November. Mr. President, thank you very much for your indulgence.